Welcome to Slideshow. I'm Dave Hayward and I'm the founder of Europa Creative Partners. This week's guest is Lisa Oakley. She's director and lead consultant at People Associates. Amongst many talents, she's got a private investigator's license, and her slideshow this week is about using conflict as data. Lisa and I did get into a little bit of trouble with latency and lagging during the recording, so we've had to do some pretty stellar work, thanks in part, of course, to the Descript platform to clean it up in the edit, especially around the sound. That means that you may notice a few more of the seams than usual and a couple of patches of wobbly sound. But Lisa's content and IP is so good that you probably, even if you notice, you'll be as rapt and intrigued as I was. It's a great episode. Please remember to like and subscribe to Slideshow wherever you're listening to us, and let's get into it.
Conflict is data. The topic today is a topic that a lot of us tend to avoid, and that is conflict. But really, if we break it down, conflict is just information, and we can process that information in the same way that we process any other form of data. What I'm here to talk about is the fact that conflict as a factor or contributor in your environment might be the thing that's holding back your organization's performance. When we talk about high performing, engaging teams, productive organizations that are delivering to target, we often don't think about the things that are holding us back, and conflict can be one of those things. How we approach it can unlock a whole heap of clarity for business owners, leaders. I don't know how many people listening would say they love conflict.
Yeah, I am kind of conflict averse, so that's one of the reasons I was looking forward to catching up with you, is that, you can't get through life and through corporate life and things like that without experiencing it, but it's not something that I think I'm necessarily that good at or I look forward to. If I can come out of this prezzo with it only being data, then I'd be delighted.
Very good. And there's a whole heap of reasons why we avoid conflict, right? Or it has a negative connotation for us. And they're hardwired. Maybe there's something in our psyche, in our DNA, in our makeup that means we typically avoid the difficult conversations or the difficult things. Or we've been burned before, right? We've, through life experiences over a period of time, tried and felt this conflict and the impact of this conflict. And so it's natural instinct to avoid, like the fight or flight thing. Yeah. The main thing I've found over time is that leaders avoid difficult conversations because they're personal, right? We're actually emotional beings. I like to think that I'm really rational, logical, and systematic, but actually fundamentally, we feel first, our emotions kick in, and then we rationalize those thoughts later. I know a lot of your listeners are in high growth and tech environments, and we tend to be wired for speed in those entrepreneurial spaces. It's important, and conflict slows us down. But sometimes it can be the Achilles, the thing that gets in the way silently. A lot of my clients that work in this space have lots of things on the go. They're constantly juggling. So friction is something that's challenging to just get to in the day to day. Then there's little evidence and support of a particular direction or view. So this is that kind of missing data thing. It's just vibes. So do we delve into this if it's just vibes, if it's just superficial or not? That can feel a bit risky. And again, we've talked about already fear based on previous experiences. If I tackle this, is it going to blow up? And we'll just keep things ticking along. We'll just avoid it in case it blows up. So quite often people call me too late and leave it a bit too long to intervene, while conflict is chipping away at their speed, at their alignment, and overall at their culture and performance.
So they've moved from the fear of escalation to it actually escalating, basically.
You're right. Sometimes it can escalate because you've done nothing. So maybe it wouldn't have escalated had you intervened.
Yeah,
This is
interesting.
trick.
Yeah.
So the antidote, the solution or the perspective I've got for you today is that conflict is information. So if we approach it in a neutral way, rather than approaching conflict in an avoidant or overly passive or overly aggressive way, it's just there to tell us something, right? One of the biggest mindset shifts, you can see it there, is that conflict isn't always dysfunction. It's not always a problem. Conflict can lead to improved working relationships. Conflict can lead to innovative customer solutions. conflict just tells us something. The way we respond to it really defines whether or not it has influence or power over us, or whether we manage to control how we engage with it in the environment to get the best outcome. A couple of things here. One, conflict is a signal. There's some sort of friction, there's some sort of undercurrent. You're going to feel that or sense that. And then two, people usually have these default working styles or methods. That is the pattern, the repeated behavior that emerges. Unless we address the conflict, these repeated patterns or styles just continue, and we're left with a product of circumstance. If we intercept these patterns, these are like neurological pathways in our brain, yeah? If we circuit break the neurological pathway with some sort of insight, we help that person to see this might be a feedback conversation, and they just don't know that what they're doing is landing really poorly with a customer. They have an opportunity then to identify what's the root cause, how might I show up differently, and act, which is that fourth step there, deploy said intervention. So if we actually respond to these signals early, if we tune into them, we prevent that kind of drift, and we prevent this avoidance that can chip away at our culture.
Obviously, you're working in often New Zealand context. Do you find that there's a cultural thing with Kiwis about how we handle conflict? I feel like I struggle sometimes to get a no from a Kiwi. Something that some of my US clients have found really difficult working in New Zealand is that they won't say no. They'll just keep dragging stuff out because they're too polite to actually say that they're not interested. What sort of things do you find working in New Zealand that are quite unique to us?
Yeah, I think I could stereotype New Zealand contexts. I think industries. Firstly, there's the Kiwi layer, the Kiwiisms. Then
Yeah,
there's make the industry,
yeah,
academia, public sector versus engineering versus FMCG, retail, telco. They've all got their own industry characteristics that mean people are conditioned to respond in certain ways within their sector, perhaps. And then you overlay that with another complicating factor that we are all quite diverse, right? We come from different backgrounds, whether they are generational or international. And to come back to your point, what I'm seeing is not so much of the nice Kiwi, although that is a factor, and avoiding difficult conversations. I'm finding conflict coming about because the Chinese engineer has invested a significant amount of money in a product, and they've engaged with a New Zealand-based perhaps fund. So you've got somebody who's thrown a whole heap of equity into it, and then they've employed a Mexican production manager.
yeah,
So
yeah,
again, we're probably stereotyping, not meaning to discriminate or offend anybody, but we all know that different cultures have different default or typical preferences, and then how we engage with those cultures, we need to be pretty sensitive to that. So yeah, absolutely. I can imagine your US clients having challenge in New Zealand when it comes to these things. Yeah, I do a lot of investigating. We'll get to that. So
yeah,
conflict typically arises in employment situations as a result of disputes, whether they are, whistleblower or protected disclosure or otherwise, just good old fashioned complaints. I think Kiwis can struggle with the directness of other cultures. If I think
yeah,
about having taught international comparative employment relations, German cultures, Japanese cultures, in some cases, South African cultures, they bring these incredibly talented, our economy relies on this migrant talent, right? And then we try and blend that, integrate that into our Kiwi way, and can quite easily be offended, sometimes rightly, sometimes a little too sensitive. So yeah, conflict comes about most definitely through these intercultural experiences.
yeah. Wow.
I could probably talk about that all day. I'll stick to my
Yeah,
slide.
so could I. Let's stick to the slides. Yeah, totally.
So 3 conversations, just boiling it down, the expectation conversations. These are the conversations we don't have. So whether you are trying to brief a external provider or whether you are trying to enable somebody to achieve something internally, employee manager discussion, for goodness sake, be clear about what it is that you want. I had a brief with a new client this week, really engaging discussion, very pie in the sky, very strategic thinker. And I had to go away and work quite hard to interpret exactly what it was, the deliverables or the outputs or the results that he wants, right? Yet, if you want to avoid room for interpretation and getting it wrong, obviously, then be explicitly clear about what it is that you want in the first place. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs and founders are incredibly inspirational and they see these sort of big picture or big ideas. Maybe work with somebody else that can help you operationalize it and break it down so that it makes sense to the person that you're communicating with so that they are clear of what good looks like. That's a skill. The second thing would be the accountability conversation. So if it's not working, this is the whole intervene early, define the gap, help ensure that the individual understands how they can close the gap. I think about it in terms of expected performances here, your current deliverables or outputs or performances here, whether it's behaviors or task output or timeframes or quality or whatever. How do we close that gap and do that together? These are the conversations that are typically avoided. And then repair conversations. So none of us are perfect. I think we can assume generous intent. We all come to work to try and do our best, but we sometimes get it wrong. So in any relationship, there's a huge amount of relief and trust building that comes from acknowledging when you do get it wrong and working out a plan to repair. I do a lot of mediations, whether they're directors with money invested, can't stand the sight of each other, eroding the equity in the business because they just need a wee reset, repair conversation, because at some point along the way it went awry, or just the interpersonal bumps in the road. You might have misinterpreted something a colleague said, was offended by that, and then it triggers this protracted conflict that can all be avoided if somebody just apologized. I'm dealing with a couple of locksmiths last week, had a big bust up in open plan office, not great for the customer, not great for the culture, not great for the psychological safety. But to their credit, they were able to shake hands and draw a line under it and move on. Having a repair conversation is owning where you made a mistake and committing to doing it differently in future.
I know of two directors who used to come to work. They'd fallen out so badly that they used to turn up at work, go into their offices, and then communicate by email. And yeah, I'm sure you see a lot of that sort of stuff where it's gone so far along where, as you say, they could have just said sorry at some point or tried to acknowledge that there'd been a breakdown or make some way of repairing it. Instead, they were going to like extreme passive aggression or even aggression.
Yeah, I think you wonder about the what that achieves, how that actually helps the situation move forward. It doesn't. Acknowledging
Yeah.
or owning that impact to the individual, not one of those passive aggressive apologies where you say, I'm sorry how that made you feel. Actually,
Yeah.
I did this, own the behavior. And as a result, you felt that's very validating to somebody, right? Like any good problem solving model, I'm sure you've got engineers or consultants or technical specialists on the call listening in. Any good problem solving model has a series of steps. These are some possible steps you could apply to a hard conversation framework, but they're really taken from problem solving science. Define the problem. Once the problem is defined, it's half solved, then you know what you're dealing with. Ideate without judgment. What are some options for how we might resolve this? Evaluate those options in terms of perhaps a particular criteria that you're working to. What can you live with? Lock that in, an action plan, and away you go. Evaluate. Anyone trying to solve any problem is going to apply those types of principles. This hard conversation framework is just those principles applied to conflict, an interpersonal problem. So what's the issue? And sometimes the issue is not what you think. So I'm sure you've had an experience where you've been in a conflict or a disagreement, and actually the thing that's bugging you is the straw that broke the camel's back. There's something
Mm.
else beneath the thing that's the apparent superficial surface issue. What do we need to work through in order for this to work? And in most cases, in the mediations I do, it's all the same factors. It's trust. How do we rebuild that? Like, how would you rebuild trust in any relationship? It's clarity. And typically that comes down to this is my responsibility or role or accountability, and this is yours, and this is how we work together. It's safety. How do we ensure that it's a safe environment? And that might mean, I'm pretty hot headed, but I've learned over the years to call my jets, time out. And people know that about me now. So if I remove myself from a situation, it's not a passive aggressive thing. I'll always commit to coming back once I've had that time to reflect and digest. That's quite a healthy thing to do. These things tend to be patterns that I see in interpersonal conflict. What's the counterfactual? What's the thing that is the likely outcome if nothing changes? Sometimes I'll ask leaders, is this relationship recoverable? And you really know your gut instinct will tell you if this is a managed exit, negotiated mutually agreed exit because the relationship can't continue, and that's unfortunate. Uh, but but sometimes it can. So this is the if nothing changes, then what are our options? Is it to conclude this relationship? And what are the costs? How do we quantify that, particularly if they've got strong customer relationships? So there's value in repair and reconciliation as opposed to just separation, but both have their place. What are the kind of non-negotiables for each person? Boundaries are a big one. What's a boundary for one person might not be a boundary for another person. So actually being explicit about that, and sometimes upfront, we do team canvas exercises where we talk about, particularly in alliances, what's above the line and what's below the line. Because when you've got all these different organizations or cultures coming together, what one person thinks is an acceptable thing to say, another person might be offended by. How do we know that if we don't set those boundaries and expectations upfront? And then what do we need to progress, basically? So
Everything seems great in theory until you actually do it. I was actually just going to pick up on one thing. I hate to act when I'm angry. I really don't like that. And I've done it many times before. If I feel myself getting heated, that I'll just leave the meeting or refuse to talk anymore. And it did backfire on me once in that the people in the room just kept wanting to hash it out. And I was like, there's no point because I can't engage. I don't want to engage with this in
mm,
this state. I need to chill out. I want my prefrontal cortex to be fully engaged.
this is it.
And yeah, but it didn't. It stops things escalating in my experience. And also, it's much better to be present without that kind of rage and all that kind of stuff. The complicating factor, your hippocampus essentially hijacking your thought process.
That's it. That's it. Is amygdala hijack one of those?
Yeah,
One of
amygdala
those
hijack. Yeah,
we've all been there. And interesting that you say it was in a room. Did you excuse yourself? Did you politely get up, or were you just not able to? The social context
I
didn't
did.
allow
I
that?
did. Actually, it was a very strange situation. It escalated. I had one person just really going for me, and I just clamped down. I just refused. I didn't want to talk anymore, and they just kept trying to litigate and get me to engage and stuff. We ended up taking a break and all these sorts of things, and then we tried to resolve it the next day. But I think it was less about us. I think the two of us reconciled pretty quickly. It was more about the effect on the group that was the issue. And there were a couple of very conflict averse people in there, and they really struggled with it, the whole thing. And yeah, it wasn't a great scene, I have to say. But ultimately, it did resolve itself because we were both committed to resolving it.
Good to hear. I think there's a slight difference between conflict, interpersonal disagreement, if you like, which is always going to happen. Things get sporty, and that's healthy, and that's what we're talking about, and bullying or intimidation or harassment. And one thing I've found where that switch flicks over for people is if they have excused themselves. So you acknowledge what the other person is saying, and perhaps they're heated and they don't know it, and you can feel yourself getting a bit hot
Yeah.
under the collar, and you excuse yourself. And then the one person like follows the other person. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
come across that, but
Yes.
that's intimidation, 100%. So somebody's tried to remove themselves from
Yeah.
the hazard, the situation, the trigger, and then the other person's just followed them. And
My God.
usually in
Yes.
those cases, I would conclude you're bullying and harassment if I was investigating because they haven't been given that time out. Interesting.
Wow. Yeah. God, what an interesting job you've got.
Hey, what leaders get wrong about conflict? I've got a little saying conflict is a bit like death in taxes. It's inevitable. It's just how we handle it and respond to it that defines us. So high performers often get just left alone to do their thing, but that can create a bit of chaos, a little bit of a trail of disaster for others. So just making sure that parameters are set, rails are set for everyone in your organization, not just those that might look like they need it. I think this is your one. Nice for effective. So you're talking about Kiwis earlier being quite nice, and kindness is great, but without clarity, it's quite confusing. It's a
Yeah.
bit, people can be unsure or misinterpret nice. Thinking that culture problems, and this is the organizational culture, are sort of personality problems or individual when actually they are perhaps systemic or tolerated over a period of time. Like we all know that for bullying or unacceptable behaviors to continue in an environment, usually a whole bunch of people know that's going on and are not intervening. So it's a systems or cultural issue rather than necessarily just the two people that are having it out with one another, because those two people have probably sat in a room with half a dozen other people who haven't intersected at any point.
Is that what you call horizontal bullying? I've come across it before. I was in a workplace years and years ago, a long time ago, and my team, there were two women in my team, and there was another team also in the same, it was a very big open plan office. And something happened. One of the people from the bigger team turned on the two that worked for me. And I came to work one day and I noticed that they were physically sitting, they couldn't sit further apart than each other. And it felt like there was an activating person on the other side, and she had created the other people joined in. It was super weird. And we ended up resolving it by tackling it head on. But I think if we'd left it, it could have got really grim.
Yeah, yeah. I can think of a number of situations that I've been in where the conversation is had once you leave the room. Somebody says to you, "Are you okay? Because the house such and such spoke to you. Was it great? Was it?" And I'm like, "Well, you could have said that in the
Yeah,
room. You know,
totally.
when I was under the heat.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, but don't ask me if I'm okay after the meeting when I'm just trying to pick
Yeah, no,
myself up and
totally.
put myself back together."
Yeah, exactly. Sorry you were crying uncontrollably and I did nothing.
Do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
Yeah.
This one I think is typical. We try and solve things based on what we can see, but good old iceberg analogy. What you can see is usually only the tip of the iceberg. So what's going on behind the scenes? Conflicting values, conflicting beliefs, conflicting thought patterns. All of those things happen before we see conflicting behaviors. So I think as leaders, actually trying to sit, listen, unpack, understand before solving, before just jumping to, I think it's this, and so therefore here's the solve. Let's try and understand first. And then this one you've probably seen as well, just that delegating conflict upwards. I'm going to avoid it. Yeah, escalation is abdication. I'm going to make the boss deal with it. Yeah, not great. It's a bit like mum saying, I'm going to let dad deal with it, or dad saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to let mum deal with it. It's just not great
Yeah.
culturally.
Yeah. And I suppose the CEO, the leader, has got a lot of things on their plate. And if they're constantly having to deal with these sorts of things, it's not great use of their time also.
Yeah, I would say as leaders, back your people. And if they have confidence that you've got their back, if they've got that ground covered, then they are more likely to address things. So if conflict is escalating upwards in your organization, I suppose it's a question of, do people feel safe to address
Yep.
it further down? Yeah.
And also there's those types of leaders who, will undermine people that report to them if you go to them. And that is another way that stuff starts rolling upwards, is if you don't get the answer you want from the GM, but you go to the director and the director just goes, "Oh no, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." That sort of thing.
100%.
Once in a while, probably okay, but as a regular thing is just so destructive.
Yeah. You're just going to lose your leaders then, aren't you? They're going to be disengaged if they are undermined like that. But it's so easy to do. In the moment, somebody comes up to your desk or calls you and you just think, oh, yeah, we'll sort it. But actually, you have to think twice and go, you know what? If so-and-so needs such and such, then that's your primary port of call. So I would support them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So private investigator meets HR. Love doing what I do. And the requirements changed. Oh, I want to say about 6 or 7 years ago now. I needed to get my PI license. No cheating spouses or surveillance vans, but just in order to conduct investigations in employment. And what we're seeing now, it's quite fascinating actually, is AI generated complaints. 5 people think Sally's a toxic manager. And that might go to the whistleblower hotline and they might call me and say, Lisa, we've got to get to the bottom of this. But is it 5 people that think Sally's a toxic manager, or is it just somebody that's gone to town with ChatGPT and Claude and all the other different tools that are out there? So it's actually really hard to know now as a PI what is truth. Even evidence that's put
Right.
up, I've seen text message evidence that's clearly Canva, but I've got to put it
Right.
to the other party and say, hey, give me your thoughts and feedback on this. So what being an investigator has helped me to do is understand that everybody's got their own version of the truth. And we tend to retrospectively, we tend
Mm.
to patch this together after the fact in a way that's convenient to reinforce our particular views. And that's not wrong. An individual's truth or perspective or experience is valid, it's their experience. I suppose my job is to just understand whether the events described occurred, whether they meet the threshold or standard according to that organisation's policies for any behaviour, whether it be bullying, harassment, misconduct, or otherwise. But it does reveal some hidden dynamics, misalignment, it's understanding clarity, unclear. I suppose authorities is the opposite of is that environment clear, expectations clear, or are there things that should have been more explicit were less so, and that's created this kind of grand friction.
Wow.
Interesting.
And how did
Any thoughts
you,
on this
what
one?
made you decide to, was it just the nature of your work meant that you needed to tool up on on the PI tip, or what was it that made you decide to do that?
Yes. In order for me to conduct investigations as an independent external third party, where maybe multiple organisations are involved or a particular organisation is involved, I need to have a license, a PI license. In-house, HR professionals don't need to have a license, but it's been fantastic, yeah, getting experience in this space and actually I think a lot of times we'll conduct investigations that might be a little bit off track, but and we forget to do a kind of comprehensive findings. At the end of
Yes.
the day, based on each of these allegations, and that's what I love about scope in terms of reference, is that I basically get told, here's the brief, and go outside the brief. So I've got this complaint and I've broken it down, and this is what I'm looking for. Am I able to conclude that these events occurred and they meet the standard, yes or no? To do that point by point and then to do that sort of overall, I suppose it's a useful way of objectively looking at conflict as data, right? Which is a point of the presentation. It's a useful way of thinking, okay, if I just strip the emotion out of it, this person's got the perspective, which sounds very convincing. And I usually get off the phone with a complainant and I think, oh, guilty as sin,
Mm.
but they never are. There's the probabilities, things come out in the wash. And then I interview the respondent or witnesses and the respondent and I go, oh, there's nothing to see here. And then I've got to wade through all the artifacts, all the information that people have given me and assess it objectively. It's a unique skill, but I suppose it helps me to approach conflict with less of a sensitivity, more.
I have to admit that I am a massive detective fiction fan. I've read a lot of
Okay.
non-fiction as well. And I read a book called Homicide: Life on the Street, which was about this. It's a factual thing. And the guy, David Simon, who wrote the book, embedded himself with these homicide detectives. And the thing that came out that I found most interesting about the way they investigate things is that they were very focused on evidence. We're taught by fiction to think about motive and all these kinds of things, but these guys would not. They would quite often come unstuck at court because the court would say, "Why do you think they did it?" And they would say, "I don't know why they did it. I just know that they were there." And there
Wow.
was this way of they had really broken it down into what is the thing that we can control and what are the, like you say, the artifacts that we can work on, and actually figuring out what's going on in someone's head is really hard to do.
I love that you've said that. It's made me think investigative processes are quite forensic.
Yeah.
They're typically quite divisive, meaning they set people up against one another. So an employer will ring me, usually on Friday afternoon, and say, this person's complained about such and such. We need to investigate. And I'll
Right.
think, all to horses, have you said we're going to investigate? Because as soon as you've said that, you can't retract it.
Right.
But I would suggest if we look at an interpersonal conflict or a problem, investigation is like the picture on the slide, putting it under the microscope. It can often protract the conflict. It can be really disruptive to productivity and engagement, especially if witnesses are involved and they've got to say, side with this person or side with that person, or actually witnesses can decline to participate and then you're left with very little other than he said, she said type situation. The
Right.
outcomes of investigations are usually one of three things. One, complaints upheld. So events described occurred, meet the threshold. I just create a liability for that organisation. They're going to get a grievance. It's a guaranteed slam dunk grievance and they pay me for the privilege. That's pretty silly. So often I'll talk clients out of investigating if where there's smoke, there's fire, and they think this thing's going to be upheld. I'll suggest that they spend their money via other means. But
Yeah.
sometimes if the complaint is upheld and the investigation needs to take place because the board want the truth or whatever it might be, the findings are not sufficient to warrant termination of employment. So you've got this conflict, you've protracted it through this forensic process, you've
Oh my God.
concluded that yes, it's upheld, and then these two folks still have to work together.
Oh my God.
So you think, wow, what have we been doing for the last couple of months? Why don't we just sit these guys in a room and try and get them to figure it out? That's where the mediation technique comes in. The second possible outcome is that the complaint is not upheld, right? Usually people complain about me when I conclude these findings. I just get
Yeah.
bowled into the mix because they're dissatisfied with the findings because they feel as though this person shouldn't be exonerated. They're guilty and they
Yeah.
want justice. And so I end up in these debates where I'm sorry, but my view is different. The relationship, right? The relationship has to continue. The two still have to work together. So you've got an expensive process that kind of concludes this whole thing was a storm in a teacup, and now these folks have to work together. You've got to start from scratch. Or the third and final outcome, which I say to people is rare but possible, is that there's insufficient evidence to conclude either way, right? And so you pay me for the privilege of giving you a report that's inconclusive, and these two people still have to work together. So what does that tell you? Probably that 9 times out of 10, where somebody complains and there needs to be some sort of intervention, is the forensic detective type approach the right way to go? Or if we approach conflict differently and think about what can we learn from this? How might we reconcile? Apology. I was chatting to a chap today who's doing his thesis. I'm doing some doctoral studies in conflict. He's doing his on the role of an apology in conflict. And I just thought, wow, how impactful sometimes is an apology, even the one we don't necessarily want to give, to restorative justice. It's huge. So I
And
could probably talk about that all day.
the nature and the quality of the apology are very important. And one of the things that I've noticed is that every time you add a but, you like instantly liquidate the power of the apology.
Erase, erase the bit. Yeah.
Yeah, you're watering it down if you say, I'm sorry that happened, but you did. And it's kind of like you gotta keep your side of the street tidy is essentially the part that makes an apology work.
I'm not a big fan of rules, probably more a fan of principles. But if we had some golden rules of resolving anything, it would be have the confidence to name the real problem, not the polite problem. Quite often we're all in a room, we can all see that the sky is blue, but none of us are prepared to say that the sky is blue. Call out the elephant in the room, if you like. Find a language that works for your team to do that. Some people are advocates of radical candor. I think sometimes radical candor goes a bit far and it becomes bullying. It really is, it needs to be calibrated in that environment. So I come back to what is acceptable interpersonal communication in a construction or warehouse and distribution environment. It's going to be different in a law firm or an engineering consultancy. Do you know what I mean? So determine what language kind of works for your environment and how to do this safely. Agree some protocols around feedback. Number 2 would be clarity and consequence. So this is the nice can sometimes kill.
Yeah.
So compassion or empathy has its place. I'm not saying we shouldn't be nice, but without the kind of guardrails or expectations or standards, or sometimes the firm expectations, it creates dysfunction and we just don't think about it, but we experience it down the track. And that third rule there just says every hard conversation needs to have a forward-looking plan. I think sometimes I use this term, we do this autopsy on the issue. And it's like the issue's happened and the thing is dead. Let's not keep doing this autopsy on the conversation that we had that went south. Let's just pause, draw a line under it, turn the page in the book, whatever analogy you want to use, and think about what we need to succeed moving forward. Any good mediation, there's usually this turning point where people have dissected the thing that got them wound up in the first place and reset and look at, okay, so how do we move forward constructively? Okay, we need to have regular one-on-ones. Okay, when should we do that? Should we go for lunch on Fridays once a month? Okay, great. That momentum is forward-looking and helps people adapt to changes and see that the actions that are required to get themselves out of this funk are actually achievable, maybe even pleasant. Lunch every Friday once a month sounds like a great idea. Next. So having those plans moving forward.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, cool.
I think that's my last slide. I think that's me. So I'm a musician. I love the idea of harmony,
Sweet.
but quite often we can't achieve that. Quite often there's a bit of dissonance and we just need to work through that dissonance, let it resolve and learn from it. That's the key takeaway from today.
I like how you've linked it to high performance because I think that often the idea of conflict actually making stuff better or actually helping you get closer to your purpose is not examined enough, because one of the things is if you've got a high performing team, that team is normally diverse in some shape or form, and it's the diversity that makes it work, but it's also the diversity that creates conflict. So I guess part of the trick is keeping that conflict healthy.
I think you're right. I work with one board. I suppose the point I'm trying to make with the story is that conflict is progress.
Yeah.
I work with one board and they are really nice and they have these great board meetings. And each time there's a set agenda with, say, a dozen topics, and they have a good discussion about each one of those topics. And the action items, I kid you not, next to each one of these topics is for discussion at our next meeting.
No,
So
no.
you just think, man, I know exactly what the next meeting is going to be like, and people are going to be going around in circles, frustrated that we haven't got progress. So I guess conflict and being bold enough to make a decision or have a view and present it in a way that's respectful and considerate, but maybe differs from everyone else. Having the courage to be able to provide your perspective might actually help us get to a conclusion that ensures we're going somewhere, we're making meaningful progress. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I always really admire the challenger board member, the person that sets themselves up to always be questioning. And I think of them as like the person that's kicking the tires, that by taking a contrary position that they're actually helping to flesh out the issue in its fullness and roundness rather than just going along for the flow. In other words, it's a really good way of checking yourself before wrecking yourself. Yeah.
I think you're right. It's just the manner in which that person does that, because conflict for conflict's sake can damage relationships, right? So we all know that board member who's really oppositional and it just grates everyone. Whereas we've all been in a board meeting where somebody's talking and you think, oh my gosh, they really are on a different planet. And you just want to say, well, no, you're wrong. You just want to jump in with your view that it directly contradicts their view. A great technique that I learned some time ago now, which I think is a great way to wrap the show. Another key takeaway is that I wonder. I don't know if you've used that technique before, but
Right.
effectively such and such in a board meeting says something that's a bit off the wall, like, the grass is purple. And you're sat there thinking, I know for all the grass is not purple, but thanks, mate, for your contribution. You could come at that head on,
Yeah.
and that would really expose that person and the other people. And the dynamic shifts in the room. It's not psychologically safe being that confrontational by coming at it hard. But if you said to that person, thanks for that, I really like that you think that the grass is a color. That's really interesting to me because clearly that is interesting. That
Yeah. It is
whatever the topic
interesting.
may be, I really
Yeah.
like that you're thinking about that. And I really like that you think that it could be purple. I want to hear more about that. I want to understand it. Curiosity, yeah, that appreciative inquiry opens up a conversation, makes it way more safe. I wonder if the grass could be another color and just leave it out there for the room. You don't have to be the person that knows that the grass is green because everyone gets a bit hacked off by that person not having all the answers. But if you create the space, this is what great leaders do, for the right answer to emerge, then yeah, you've just strengthened you just created an ally from somebody who has a completely different perspective to you, and you're open to the idea that this conflict could actually help us in some way. We might learn from it, and so difference is okay, and that's something to explore rather than shut down.
Years ago, I had a job interview, and for reasons I still don't know, the person that had applied for my job internally was one of the people that interviewed me. So they had looked at this other person and then not given them the job. And it was obviously a marketing role. And this person was started talking about value propositions. And I realized that they did not know what it was. And I thought I'm in a real bind here because I want to get the job. And also I'm a kind person. I did not want to let that person be exposed in front of her colleague as not knowing the answer. So I thought I've got to find a kind but direct way of getting through this because she was asking me questions. So I said to her, uh, value propositions mean different things to different people. What does it mean for you?
Love it.
And because so often you leave job interviews and go, oh God, I shouldn't have said that. Why did I say that? This was an interview where I left and I was like, that was really great because it enabled her to save face. And I could also answer the question very directly to what she was actually asking, not what I thought she was asking. And yeah, that was one of those times where I think, as you say, rather than addressing the conflict head on, it was more about actually understanding how that other person was thinking and giving them some respect in a way to not expose them or in any way diminish their status in this kind of environment.
Yeah, I think it's building people up. And as we say here in New Zealand, it's mana enhancing, it's dignified. Yeah, very good example.
Yeah, on the topic of mana enhancing, it's been an absolute honor having you on the show. It's been so great. I always feel like when you meet brilliant people that you feel like anything is possible, and I could see that any conflict that you're involved in, that you would know what to do, which is something that's really reassuring. So hopefully you'll come back, and thank you for coming on Slideshow.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to be here. If I can help you or any of your listeners at any time, just let us know. More than happy.
Yeah, contact details are on the screen, but I'll also put them in the show notes so you can do that, or you can reach out to the show and we will happily put you in touch with Lisa. And if you had an ideal customer, Lisa, who would that be?
We deal with lots of SMEs, entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders, some executive managers in larger corporates. And also we deal with a lot of HR teams. So lots of our clients are HR professionals like us, but they either don't have the capacity or the capability, or they're conflicted just internally. So they want somebody external to step in and help out. So any of those.
All right. Hopefully one of them is listening and they'll get in touch. But yeah, like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll see you again.